This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You know what inspires me? Fearlessness, drive. I hate lazy people. Barb, stay in school. Don't you ever be lazy. Don't you ever complain about hard work. Work hard, it pays off.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Analysis with Ro. First of all, it's been a long time since you guys saw me on video specifically. I know it's been such a long while. I am back yet again with a brand new series I've been working on for a little bit. That's why I've been gone for so long, so don't worry. I'm back, and we are here with the early education series for Hisoka Mora. So we are pretty much going to examine how he got his technical expertise in things like mathematics and stuff. It's like, how did that start to develop? Because the thing about it is, right, is like, it's one thing to be gifted in that thing, but you have to like sharpen your craft. So how was that done? We're going to examine how that might have been done. The thing about this, alongst so many other things, is that for him, it's gonna be a bit of a mess to figure it out because, guys, this is due to like heavy estimation and approximation. I don't have as much information about this technical part. So really, this is based off of, again, knowledge that I have previously. Of course, with inferences, that tends to be the case. You get the knowledge you have previously, and you fill in the blanks for what the best assumption could be for the story. So this is what I essentially put together for how I think his early education went about. It's very similar to like an Alexander Hamilton, from at least how I studied it, where it's like up and down sort of thing. So it's going to be bumpy. It's not going to be clear cut, but this is the best estimation that I could get for his early education, particularly when he was in the circus. We already did kind of more like Nen education. So pretty much when his mother was alive, that was Nen education. So if you want to go back and check out the podcast series for that, it's on all streaming platforms, but of course it's on Spotify first and foremost. If you want to check that out, and yeah, it's pretty much on there for Nen education. This is more so like technical education. So things like literature, mathematics, arithmetic, things of that kind of nature. So again, things that are non-Nen related is going to be for this particular series. Also, couple of house rules I want to get down into before we get into today's episode. We will have a sponsorship. This whole podcast series is going to be sponsored by Masterclass. Better education for a better you. So when you see that ad break, that is particularly why. I just want y'all to know ahead of time. If you want to check that out, of course, there'll be information with the link down below in the description so you could figure out more about that. It's a lot of cool courses that I think you guys would particularly enjoy. I think the courses are for everything. I particularly like it for like acting. I use it for myself sometimes, so I think you guys should check it out as well. But that goes without saying. All right. Yeah, and that's it for the house rules, other than, of course, your daily announcement of, please, if you see this podcast, make sure to like and follow on all streaming platforms, however, which way, right? If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Spotify, make sure you give a follow and a like. You already know how these platforms are. I think you guys have been on the internet long enough So just make sure that whatever streaming platform that you see this on, give this a like, a follow, and make sure you share it to people who you think would be interested. Again, because it's not just me out here. Alrighty, guys, let's go on ahead and get started. Enough chit chat from me, right? You want to get into the information. So first things first that I want to get into is the early education of us tomorrow. So education pretty much is a critical foundation for a child's development. And with this character, it's no exception, like at all. However, and particularly for kids like him who grew up within the entertainment field, the act of obtaining such education is going to be a little bit different from how we traditionally see it, right? So traditionally, when you think of school/education, you think of a traditional four-wall setting, right? You go into a building, you do your schoolwork, your teacher gives you these assignments, like you do this, that, and the fourth, and then you go back home. For entertainment children in particularly, that is not always the case. For some of them, it is kind of sort of, but even with that, the schedules are so altered that it doesn't look exactly the same as like a normal kid who does not work. So they typically will go to a private or specialized school if they were to go to physical school. As far as I know, this character did not do that. He took more of the studio teacher only homeschool route, which we'll get more into. But yeah, everything is just kind of altered because of the fact that these are working kids in particularly that we are discussing. So that's the only reason why. It's because of the whole thing of being a working child that they have to consider. Like, yeah, child labor laws do have to take into effect. Like, you still have to have an education even when you're a working kid. It's just going to be altered around your working schedule. So that's the only reason why. So I don't think with this character, as far as my assumptions go based on previous knowledge, that he never had an education at all. Because legally, you just can't do that. If you have children on site and you're within the entertainment field, they kind of have to have an education. And like I said last time with Maripno, it's like he does not want to get caught up with the police any more than he already does. So it's like he might be a straight up murderer. Okay, he might be stabbing a couple of people down the street, but he will be damned. He will be damned if he gets caught up with like some labor law bullshit out of all things that gets him caught by the police. So I might be a criminal, but I follow labor law. It's the whole thing to say. Anyways, but yeah, not done through a traditional setting. Not to mention, there are a couple of other factors that are also taken into consideration when it comes to his educational journey that we'll also touch upon, such as like potential disorders, which we'll do way later as far as like the mental health section. We have an entire separate section for that. But another thing to consider is like racial and environmental factors, and of course being gifted. All of this is going to be taken into account when we talk about particular this character's education. We're going to get into all of that. So, in this whole video series, we are going to be going into all those different aspects and more to see how it all impacts Hisoka's character in particular in the grand scale theme of things, right? But especially his childhood. So that's what we're going to be going over today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So today, we have, of course, different parts as well. We are, as far as this series goes, we're going to be going over part 1 and 2. So that's for today. And for the other days that we will be going over this series, we'll pretty much go through the rest of it. I believe it's divided in parts of either 6 or 7. I'll see how I divided it later on, and you'll see a little table of contents where it'll point to you, but we are in part 1 and 2 for this video. So now we're going to get into the educational standards and structure of Glam Glass Land, which is their equivalent of Las Vegas, Nevada. And I believe we'll get into how I spelled Nevada based on their world's rules, but They have their version of Nevada. They have their version of Las Vegas, which is Glam Glass Land. So, preemptive, we will be using the same standards that Nevada uses.
So let's actually get started and talk about the educational standards and structure of Glam Glass Land, aka their equivalent of Las Vegas, Nevada. Let's get into it. So, the structure and standards of education in regards to where this character was raised, we have to understand it before we actually understand the specific kind of education he received. So that's something to truly consider. And also, another thing to consider is the time period in which we are referencing. Now, for us, we're going to use the modern day reference, so the early 2000s. For some of you, you want a bit of a challenge. So you might be more prompted to use the 90s timeline, in which probably around, I want to say the 80s. Don't know exactly when in the 80s, but that would probably be your guys' equivalent, depending on how you want to study this. There's two ways to go about it. Nobody's incorrect here, just as long as you know that technically speaking, we are dealing with a character that would be in his early 30s in like today's adulthood bracket. So that is also something to take into consideration. We're going to use the early 2000s as a point of reference for us. So this is around the time that again he's in the circus, which pretty much means he would be in his time period of being in middle school slash high school up to around, I want to say, sophomore, maybe junior year, ages 12 to 16. Uh, Maybe 17, but 16 to keep it safe is probably the safest bets of when he was in the circus. So that's essentially the time period that we are using from middle school to early to mid high school. So this is all taken into account when we will be examining this section. All right, so now we're going to get into the real juice and crux of everything for understanding the standards and structure of the education system in which Hisoka would have been raised over, or under, I should say. So let's get into essentially where he's from. Once again, Glam Glassland, aka their equivalent of Las Vegas, and it will probably be named the state of Avaden, which is Nevada spelled backwards. That's kind of how they do things, and the reason why I think that rule set in place is because of how I observed like New York New. It's like, oh, that's just New York spelled backwards. So I think that's pretty much how they avoid the whole. I think the movie was called The Interview, like the last time like a movie got in trouble for naming a Pacific country. Slash, it's just kind of more fun to like make up something that's pretty much similar to like a place in real life. I guess it's also just used for creativity reasons. Plus, that whole interview thing came like probably years after like Hunter x Hunter got made, but that was a whole thing. Off topic, but on topic. I don't know. Movies tend to do that nowadays because of the interview, but people been naming places similar uh, to an original place for creativity's sake as well. But just more facts that you should. I think the movie's named The Interview. It might have been named something else. It's very vague memory. Like it was a huge thing, I believe, in like the early 2010s is when that controversy kind of arose. So yeah. But anyways, back to Glam Glassland. So the state of Nevada, aka Nevada to us. Even though is not enrolled in a public school, he would still be technically part of the school system because apparently all kids have to be enrolled in the same curriculum, even if they're not within the same structure. So that pretty much means like even if you're not in public school, right? Say you went to private school, say you were homeschooled, you would still have to follow the same curriculum. Everyone follows the same state curriculum, at least during that time period. I'm not sure if the rules applied today, like in today's timeline, but at least back then that was the case. So there are at least 9 sections also within the governing body. And obviously everyone knows what a governing body is, but for those of you that don't know, It pretty much means they take care of the rules. This is like the legislative branch for education. They take care of the rules. They make sure the regulations go through, like any procedures, just the technical aspects, things of that nature really go into mind when we are talking about the governing body. So, this includes, but is not limited to, you have the school board or the school district board of trustees. These are 17 boards that are elected locally. Now, this facet establishes district policies, enforces the courses of study prescribed by the state administrator of public instruction. So, that's just some of the things they do. In addition, they tend to approve the curriculum and oversee the district. They budget. The district superintendent promotes the welfare of school children and manages the district as well. And that is just some of the things in which that Pacific branch does. Then we have the school districts. This is administered by the district superintendent of 17 school districts. So this specific facet implements policies that are established by the state, and then they also have the local board, and they tend to manage district operational functions and provides technical services to individual schools. So that's what that branch does. We had branch 1, and this is branch 2. Branch 3 are the schools themselves. So the public schools. Now, this one does not necessarily apply to our character, but it is still important to know about because, again, they still follow the same curriculum, even if this particular character doesn't fit into a traditional school building. This facet implements state and local policies as well as public instruction. So, again, if we were dealing with a studio teacher, which we are, what pretty much would happen in this case is instead of it being an entire school administration, like, you have like your principal, you have your teachers, like that kind of thing, it would be specifically the studio teacher's job to make sure that the education gets administered. So instead of it being multiple people, now it's just honed down to one person. We'll get more into detail about that later, but that's just the only difference that you really need to recognize. We then have legislator. This facet is constitutionally required. So this is really where all the legal stuff comes into mind. To provide for a uniform system of common schools and prescribe the manner of appointments and duties of the superintendent of public instruction. It also specifies specific programs and courses of study, overall budget authority, and guaranteed per pupil funding. Now, again, this is how you know it's written in the 2000s because I don't think they do per pupil funding as much anymore, if at all. I believe they go through a different financial system for how they tend to fund the schools, but it used to be per pupil, like 100%. Then you have the governor. This facet recommends a budget for the state department of education and for the public schools, as well as appoints commissions on professional standards in education. And that's what the governor does. Then you have the State Board of Education, which are 11 members that are elected statewide. This facet establishes statewide public school/education policies, which are not given to other entities by law, and appoints superintendents of public instruction, as well as prescribes standards for the state testing programs, and acts the state board for occupational education. So in other words, these are the people that handle the testing. So all the technical aspects to testing and standardized testing that we recognize today, these are the people that tend to handle that. I know obviously the way that tests were made back in the late 2000s are probably different from today, but standardized testing was a thing back then. It was just structured probably a lot more differently than it is in the 2020s. I remember when I took my last standardized test, it was on a computer because it was during COVID. In the planet, it was the worst thing on planet Earth. I hated it. Pro tip, I don't like standard testing as is, but if you're gonna do it, doing it on a computer, I don't recommend. I don't recommend. I would do anything to go back to the 2000s only to have standardized testing be on paper again. That's probably the one thing I miss. The fact that it was on paper. But anyways, enough about that. But yeah, they handled the testing. And then you have the superintendent, which is constitutional position, which is appointed by the State Board of Education. And for this facet or person, they tend to direct activities of the State Department of Education, and they also coordinate the Education Act in and of itself. Then you have the State Department of Education, so really the big upper man. That really is the boss, the cream of the crop, which is administered by the superintendent of public instruction. This facet carries out provisions in the state, and it implements state board policies as well as administers federal and state programs. You then have commissions on the professional standards in education. These are the 9 members appointed by the governor. This facet establishes qualifications for teaching licensure. This is the governing body that also oversees all educational standards in Hisoka's home. So all of these together combined, these are the governing bodies that pretty much handle all the legal aspects, the technical aspects, when it comes to the curriculum. So who handles the curriculum? Who makes sure that all these kids are pretty much following the same standards and making sure they're following the same laws that apply to education? And again, pretty much where the studio teacher will probably be getting all the information stuff from. So whenever I say the curriculum, this is why I'm telling you guys this now, because when I talk about the studio teacher, I don't want you guys confused. So whenever I say the curriculum and like where the curriculum comes from, this is where it comes from. This whole governing body, I do want you to keep that in mind as we go through this series. So this is the governing body to keep in mind. They oversee all of the education standards when it comes to this character's childhood home. And even though, again, we are talking about a studio teacher, so they don't work in a public school setting, that thing in particular does not apply. They still have to adhere to the same curriculum and codes and regulations. So that's why I'm talking about that all. So one might also wonder, now that we're done with that, what exactly are those codes and regulations? Well, we're going to explain that within the second portion of this particular essay. But before we do talk about that within this podcast episode / video essay in a way, we are going to take a quick break to discuss today's sponsorship, which is Masterclass. So guys, I will see you in a minute after our sponsor break, and then when I come back, we're going to talk more about the educational standards of Glam Glass Land.
This video is sponsored by Masterclass.
Hello.
Hi.
Are we ready?
Let's get started. That's an off. Cool.
Living without color is like living without love.
Excuse me? Black holes, the Big Bang, time travel, God.
Welcome back from the ad break, everybody. All right, let's get into the standards. So after we're done pretty much setting up the structure, now that you understand how the entire education administration works, so basically the legal, legislative side of it, where all the rules came from, if you will, we're now going to get into the standards in and of themselves. Standard, standard, standard. I've been saying the same thing over and over again. But what are the standards exactly? Well, I'm about to tell that to you right now. So pretty much education standards of Glam Glass Land, aka their version of Las Vegas, Nevada. You can take notes if you want to. You can take notes if you want to for this whole thing, but especially for here. So Glam Glass Land is going to basically adhere to the Nevada Academic contest standards, or the Hunter x Hunter equivalent of those specific rules. So the Avadan academic content standards would pretty much be the equivalent of the Nevada academic content standards. So the Pacific standards of what I'm talking about typically emphasize the following, which is a focus on outcomes rather than the means, meaning they kind of do not care about how they get the results. They just care about the results in and of itself, which again can bring a lot of like negative consequences, because you're pretty much saying that as long as the kids have like great test scores, you really don't care if they're really absorbing the information, they're really learning anything. So the fact that it blatantly just said, yeah, I kind of don't care how they're learning as long as, those test scores look great. We only kind of see the numbers. Like, we're not really taking into consideration the kids. I mean, that indicates a flaw within the standard in and of itself. But let's continue. They also have an integrated model for literacy, research, and media skills that are embedded in the standards, and a shared responsibility for student literacy development. I mean, that's good. So in addition to these standards, you would have essentially gifted students like Hisoka himself, which we did discuss him being a gifted kid before. Again, go check out that previous podcast series on either Spotify or YouTube. That will also have an audio version. But he would be considered a gifted kid as well. And he would probably have to adhere to the following standards for specifically advanced students. So for advanced learners in particular, they have to demonstrate independence, which he does to this very day, even as an adult. They build strong content knowledge, also something that we see even throughout modern day. They respond to the changing demands of the audience, task, purpose, and discipline. Also something that we see canonically, even in his adulthood. They comprehend as well as critique. Funny enough, also something that we see him do a lot. They value evidence. They come to understand different perspectives and cultures. Also something that we see him do. It's like, it kind of correlates and applies to everything, because again, he fits to the teeth. Like, he would be considered a gifted kid, something I examined before. Continuing on, they must also meet certain reading and math requirements for college and career readiness, such as understanding the following key details and ideas. So understanding key details and ideas are very imperative when it comes to particularly advanced learners, when it comes to being college and career ready. You also have craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, make sense of the problems and persist in solving them, reasons abstractively and quantitatively, creates viable arguments, and then criticizes the reasoning of others, which is something that we also see him do sometimes. Models with mathematics, something that we do see within the pre-canon, especially towards the end more so, which is something that I've demonstrated in one of the episodes examining him as a gifted student. But yes, models with mathematics. You also have uses appropriate tools strategically, attends to precision. It's depends on how you view precision, but it's like, yes, from a technical aspect, you really just have to get past his vibe, I guess. You got to get past certain things to understand the precision aspect. He's a lot less messier than people give him credit for. Looks for and makes use of structure. Again, something that you don't really see on the surface. You really have to look a bit closer when it comes to his character, but that is something that I notice him do. It's just pay closer attention, because it's not obvious, or as obvious as, like, say, his fiance. Looks for and expresses regularity in repeated reasoning. So again, this is something that you would probably have to look harder at, and I'll probably demonstrate later when we get to the manga evidence for this entire series. But this is something that's shown not as frequently, but it does occur within his character as well. And yeah, that is pretty much the standard in and of itself. So today, episode one, I just wanted to go through more of an introduction and anything. I wanted you to guys to really understand what type of standards and structures that we're working with when we're pretty much going through the rest of this unit, because I just don't want you guys confused when I'm talking about certain things, like again, the standard and the structure, and it'd be like, wait, what are we talking about again? This is episode one, kind of the block unit, right? The unit to really understand everything else as we go on. We will get into essentially part three for the next point of the series. So part three is pretty much going a little bit deeper. So after we talk about the standards and the structure, now we're going to talk about the issues. And I've already rambled a bit about one of the issues within like the USS, aka the United States of Sahara's education system, which pretty much gives me a little bit of an excuse to rant about the United States of America's education system and what's wrong with it, or like the flaws within it, even like back in the day in the 2000s. Because the thing about it is, a lot of these issues that I have talked about or am about to talk about has not really changed. Like they're still persistent even into today's time in the 2020s. We're talking like the early 2000s is the education system that I'm complaining about. But even into like the 2020s, the same issues kind of still persist. So we're going to complain about that in part three. And it's going to be a bit longer than this episode. Again, this is more of an introduction, if anything. So feel free to kind of look back and take notes for this specific episode, because moving on forward, if you did not take notes from this episode, you might be a little bit confused. So again, that's really it. Thank you guys for watching. Please remember to click on specifically the Hoobie link down below, because that's going to be your main source for following all of my social media pages. I have almost every social media page imaginable, including, for some of you that still use it, Tumblr. So Tumblr is also another main source. You'll probably catch me on there a lot more than you would any other social media source, but I also do use Blue Sky, not Twitter. I don't really rock with what Elon's doing, no tea, no shade. But let's just say me and him got like a silent beef. He don't rock with my motion, I don't rock with his motion. It's a long story. Maybe I'll explain it in a video in and of itself someday, but Blue Sky, because Twitter is an absolute no. I have a Tumblr. I have obviously a YouTube. Please remember to follow, aka subscribe, and like if you see this in video form on YouTube. If you see it on Spotify, like and follow.
Yeah, pretty much like and follow on all the social medias that you see if you can. Remember to help support me. There's also Ko-fi and a Patreon, especially for those of you that are interested in my Patreon. We got what's soon to be a Secession War series for my Patreon viewers. I know that for the topics that I want to discuss, it goes a little bit deeper, especially into similarities and comparisons I like to make with certain geopolitical situations. It's still going to be vague enough to where it's like respectful, but because of the way that I talk, I just like to keep it on Patreon, keep it private and to a certain club. So if you want to join that, my Patreon is also in the Hoobie. Like every single social media source to like and follow me on, it's going to be on the Hoobie. And again, it's going to be pinned to my Tumblr. There's a notation if you want specific details and a guide as to what to follow and why. It's going to be up there. So I hope to see you guys in the next video, episode 2 for this series. Again, it's going to be all about the issues within the education system in which he was raised in. And then we're going to keep going from there. But I will see you guys next time.